Imagine a letter, sealed with a spiral, daring the world's greatest detective to solve a deadly puzzle. Who is the architect, the shadowy mastermind behind a string of crimes that threaten to unravel society? Hercule Poirot faces his most cunning foe in a high-stakes game of wits, racing through London's fog and Paris's glitter to unravel a web of murder, abduction, and betrayal. From a courier's blood-soaked note to a bomb ticking in a Scottish castle, each clutches pieces, ciphers, and spirals pulls Poirot deeper into danger. Can he outsmart a genius who sees the world as a chessboard? Or will the architect's final move checkmate him? In a heart-pounding chase from a masquerade ball to a seaside showdown, Poirot unravels a plot to reshape power itself, confronting a disgraced genius in a battle of minds that ends with justice, but at what cost? Will Poirot's little grey cells triumph, or has he met his match? Chapter 1. The enigmatic invitation. The rain fell in relentless sheets over London, cloaking the city in a silver haze that blurred the edges of its grand architecture. In his impeccably tidy flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his small, fastidious hands folded over a cup of steaming tea. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked with a precision that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. It was a rare evening of solitude, one he cherished, for it allowed the little grey cells to dance unencumbered by the clamour of the world. Yet tonight, something stirred in the arid whisper of intrigue that made the hairs on his meticulously groomed moustache quiver. The post had arrived earlier that day, delivered by a harried postman who had muttered apologies for the damp state of the letters. Among the usual invitations to society, galas, and requests for his detective services was an envelope that stood apart. It was crafted from heavy cream vellum, sealed with a wax stamp, bearing no crest, only a curious spiral design that seemed to twist inward like a labyrinth. The address was written in an elegant, almost calligraphic hand. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, Whitehaven Mansions, London. No return address, no hint of the sender's identity. Poirot turned the envelope over in his hands, his sharp green eyes narrowing. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he placed it on the polished mahogany table, aligning it precisely with the edge, and studied it as one might study a rare artifact. The paper was expensive, the ink a deep indigo that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. Whoever had sent this had taken care to make an impression, and Poirot, a man who prided himself on his ability to read the subtleties of human intention, sensed a challenge. With a delicate flick of his letter-opener, silver instrument shaped like a miniature rapier, he slit the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, its texture as luxurious as the envelope itself. The message was brief, yet its words carried a weight that made Poirot's heart quicken. Monsieur Poirot, you are renowned for unravelling the knots of human deceit, for seeing what others cannot. I offer you a puzzle worthy of your intellect, a game that will test the limits of your celebrated grey cells. I am the architect, and I have designed a series of events that will unfold across this city and beyond. Solve them if you can. Fail, and the consequences will be dire. The first move is mine. Watch closely. Yours in anticipation. The architect Poirot read the letter twice, his lips pursed in a tight line. The tone was neither boastful nor threatening, but rather a curious blend of admiration and defiance. This architect knew him, or at least knew of him, and had crafted this missive to provoke a response. It was a gauntlet thrown at his feet, and Poirot, for all his fastidiousness, was not a man to ignore such a challenge. He leaned back in his armchair, the tisane forgotten, and closed his eyes. The architect, the name conjured images of a mastermind, someone who saw the world as a chessboard, with every move calculated to perfection. But who could this be? A disgruntled rival from his days with the Belgian police, a criminal he had once thwarted, now seeking revenge, or perhaps someone entirely new, a shadow moving through the fog of London's underbelly. The clock struck. 9, its chime a gentle reminder of the world's order. Poirot rose, his movements precise, and crossed to the fireplace. He held the letter over the flame, watching as the edges curled and blackened, reducing the words to ash. He did not need to keep it. Every syllable was etched into his memory. But as he turned away, a faint sound from the street below caught his attention, a muffled cry, sharp and fleeting, like the yelp of a wounded animal. Poirot moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The street was dark, the gaslights casting pools of amber that flickered in the downpour. At first, he saw nothing unusual, only the blurred shapes of passing carriages and the occasional pedestrian huddled under an umbrella. But then, near the entrance to Whitehaven Mansions, a figure lay crumpled on the pavement, half hidden by the shadow of a lamppost. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his breath fogging the glass. He seized his overcoat and hat, his usual deliberation replaced by urgency, and descended the stairs with a speed that belied his compact frame. The porter, dozing at his desk, startled awake as Poirot swept past. "Call for a constable, vite," Poirot ordered, his voice sharp. "There is trouble outside." The rain was cold and unyielding as Poirot stepped onto the street. The figure was a man, young and wiry, dressed in the drab uniform of a courier. His cap had fallen into a puddle, and his face was pale, his eyes wide and unseeing. Blood seeped from a wound in his chest, mingling with the rainwater to form a dark, glistening pool. Poirot knelt beside him, heedless of the damp soaking through his trousers, and checked for a pulse. There was none. "Pauvre homme," Poirot whispered, his fingers brushing the man's cold hand. It was then that he noticed the scrap of paper clutched in the courier's fist. With care, he pried it free, unfolding it to reveal a single sentence. Scrawled in the same elegant hand as the letter, "The game begins." Poirot's heart thudded, not with fear, but with the thrill of a mind engaged. The architect had made their first move, and it was a bold one. This was no mere taunt. It was a declaration of war, a challenge issued in blood. Within minutes, the street was alive with the clatter of hooves and the shrill whistle of a constable. Poirot stepped back, allowing the authorities to take charge, but his eyes remained fixed on the body. The courier was young, no more than 25, with a face that spoke of a life spent running errands through London's labyrinthine streets. Why had he been chosen? Was he a pawn in the architect's game, or something more? Inspector Japp arrived shortly after, his trench coat flapping in the wind. "Poirot, what's this mess?" he asked, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "You can't seem to stay out of trouble, can you?" "It is not I who seeks trouble, my friend," Poirot replied, his accent crisp despite the chaos. "Trouble, it seems, has sought me." He handed Japp the note, watching as the inspector's brow furrowed. "The architect, eh? Sounds like some theatrical nonsense." Japp squinted at the paper, then at the body. "You think this is connected to that letter you mentioned?" "Mais oui," Poirot said. "This is no coincidence. The architect has begun their game, and this poor soul was their opening gambit." Japp scratched his chin, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Right, then. We'll need to identify this chap, see who he worked for. Could be a random attack, mind you. London's full of cutthroats these days. Poirot shook his head. Random, nan. This is precise, deliberate. The architect does not strike without purpose. The constable's men were already cordoning off the area, their lanterns casting eerie shadows on the wet cobblestones. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The letter, the courier, the note, they were all part of a larger design, a tapestry woven by a hand both cunning and cruel. But what was the pattern? What did the architect want? As the body was carried away, Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the street. The rain had washed away much of the evidence, but he noticed something glinting in the gutter, a small brass key, no larger than a thimble, its head engraved with the same spiral design as the wax seal. He slipped it into his pocket before Japp could notice, a private clue to guard until its meaning became clear. Back in his flat, Poirot lit a fresh fire and sat once more by the window, the key resting on the table before him. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift to the letter's words. A puzzle worthy of your intellect. The architect was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who thrived on complexity, who saw crime as an art form. And Poirot, with his love of order and symmetry, was the perfect adversary. He opened a drawer and retrieved a small notebook, its pages pristine. With a fountain pen, he began to write, cataloguing every detail. The letter's tone, the courier's wound, the spiral design, the note's chilling brevity. Each fact was a thread, and Poirot was determined to weave them into a net that would ensnare the architect. The telephone rang, shattering the silence. Poirot answered, expecting Japp with news of the courier's identity. Instead, a low, cultured voice greeted him, its tone smooth as velvet, yet laced with menace. Monsieur Poirot, the voice said, I trust you received my invitation. Poirot's grip tightened on the receiver. Who is this? A soft chuckle. You know who I am. The first piece is on the board. Tell me, do you feel the thrill of the chase? Poirot's voice was steady, though his pulse quickened. I feel only the desire for justice, monsieur. And I assure you, I will find you, find me. The voice laughed again, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Poirot, you have no idea what you're up against. Sleep well, detective, the next move is coming. The line went dead. Poirot set the receiver down, his expression unreadable. He crossed to the window, staring out at the city now shrouded in darkness. The architect had played their hand, and Poirot had accepted the challenge. The game had indeed begun, and he would not rest until the puzzle was solved. As he turned from the window, the brass key caught the firelight, its spiral gleaming like a promise. Poirot smiled faintly, his mind already racing toward the next clue. The architect might be cunning, but Hercule Poirot was relentless, and in this game of wits he intended to win. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Heiress. The morning after the courier's murder. London awoke to a sky bruised with clouds, the air heavy with the promise of more rain. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit with a lavender tie, sat at his desk, the brass key with its spiral engraving resting beside a fresh cup of tisane. The events of the previous night had set his mind ablaze, the little grey cells humming with questions. Who was the architect? Why had they chosen him? And what was the significance of the key, so deliberately placed in the gutter? His reverie was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. His landlady, Miss Lemon, entered, her usual efficiency tempered by a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, there's a gentleman here to see you. A Lord Hart. He's quite insistent. Says it's urgent." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Lord Hart, the industrialist. "Show him in, s'il vous plaît." Moments later, a tall man in his 50s stormed into the room, his face etched with worry beneath a mane of silver hair. Lord Reginald Hart was a titan of industry, known for his steel empire and his equally steely demeanor. Today, however, he looked like a man on the edge of collapse. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice hoarse, "I need your help. My daughter Evelyn has vanished." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Asseyez-vous, Lord Hart. Tell me everything, from the beginning, Lord." Hart sank into the seat, his hands trembling. "Last night, Evelyn attended a gala at the Dorchester Hotel. It was a charity event, filled with London's elite. She was there to represent our family, to charm the investors. You know how it is. She was radiant, as always wearing her mother's emerald necklace, a family heirloom. I received a call at midnight from her chaperone, saying Evelyn had simply disappeared. No one saw her leave. Her coat was still in the cloakroom, her car untouched. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, and no ransom note. No demands. "Nothing," Lord Hart said, his voice breaking. "I've contacted the police, but they're useless, poking around with no direction. I've heard of your reputation, Poirot. You're my last hope." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Describe this gala, see. Vous plot, who was present. What was the mood?" Lord Hart recounted the evening, the glittering chandeliers, the orchestra playing Vivaldi, the swirl of gowns and tuxedos. Evelyn, at 22, was the belle of the ball, her laughter drawing admirers like moths to a flame. She had danced with several prominent figures: Russian diplomat, a young viscount, a reclusive art collector named Victor Crane, the last anyone saw of her. She was stepping onto the terrace for fresh air, alone. Poirot's mind latched onto the details, particularly the name Victor Crane. He had heard whispers of the man, a shadowy figure whose fortune was rumoured to be built on less than legal dealings. But before he could press further, Lord Hart reached into his pocket and produced a small object, wrapped in a handkerchief. "This was found on the terrace," he said, unfolding the cloth to reveal a black chess piece of knight carved from obsidian, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. It was lying where Evelyn was last seen. The police think it's nothing, but I feel it means something." Poirot's heart quickened. The architect, the chess piece was too deliberate, too precise to be coincidence. He took the knight, turning it over in his hands. Its weight was substantial, its craftsmanship exquisite. A message, undoubtedly, but what did it signify? "I will take the case, Lord Hart," Poirot said, his voice calm but resolute. "Return home and await my instructions. Your daughter will be found." Lord Hart's gratitude was effusive, but Poirot barely heard it. His mind was already racing, connecting the chess piece to the courier's murder, the spiral key, and the architect's letter. This was no ordinary abduction. It was a move in the game, and Poirot intended to play. By midday, Poirot arrived at the Dorchester Hotel, its opulent facade gleaming despite the dreary weather. The manager, a nervous man named Mr. Pritchard, greeted him with a mixture of deference and apprehension. "We've had the police crawling all over, Monsieur Poirot. It's bad for business, you understand. Oui, but the truth, it is bad for no one, Poirot replied, his tone mild but firm. Show me the terrace, if you please. The terrace overlooked a manicured garden, its stone balustrade slick with rain. Poirot examined the spot where the chess piece had been found, near a cluster of potted ferns. The ground was clean, too clean, as if someone had swept away any trace of footprints. He crouched, his eyes scanning for anything the police might have missed. There, caught in the fronds of a fern, was a single emerald bead, its facets catching. The light like a tiny green star, iridescent, Poirot murmured, pocketing the bead. It matched the description of Evelyn's necklace, suggesting she had been here, perhaps struggling. But why leave the chess piece? Was it a taunt or a clue? He returned to the ballroom, its grandeur undiminished by the daylight streaming through the windows. The staff were tight-lipped, but a young waiter, emboldened by Poirot's gentle probing, admitted to overhearing an argument on the terrace just before Evelyn vanished. It was her and that Crane fellow, the waiter whispered. He was trying to convince her to go somewhere with him. She sounded scared. Poirot's next stop was Victor Crane's residence, a townhouse in Mayfair that exuded wealth and secrecy. The butler, a gaunt man with eyes like polished steel, informed him that Mr. Crane was indisposed. Poirot, undeterred, left a card with a note. I know of the night. We must speak. That evening, as Poirot sat in his flat, piecing together the day's findings, the telephone rang. He answered, expecting Crane or perhaps Jap with news. Instead, a woman's voice, soft and trembling, came through the line. Monsieur Poirot, it's Evelyn Hart. I don't know where I am. Poirot's grip tightened. Mademoiselle, stay calm. Describe what you see. It's dark, she whispered. A room with stone walls, like a cellar. There's a window, high up, but it's barred. I woke up here, alone. My necklace is gone, and my head, it aches. Acartes, Mademoiselle Hart, Poirot said, his voice steady. You are not alone now. Can you hear anything? Footsteps, voices, a pause, then a faint sob. Water, I hear water dripping, and someone's coming. Oh God, I have two. Go, the line cut off. Poirot stared at the receiver, his mind racing. The dripping water suggested an underground location, perhaps near the Thames. But how had Evelyn access to telephone? Was it a trap, or had the architect made a mistake? He called Jap immediately, relaying the conversation. Within hours, the police were scouring London's underbelly warehouses, abandoned tunnels, riverside. Cellars. Poirot, meanwhile, returned to the chess piece, turning it over in his hands. Its base was slightly uneven, and with a gentle twist, it came apart, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside was a folded slip of paper, no larger than a postage. Stamp with a single word. Check, mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. The architect was playing a game of chess, and Evelyn was a piece on the board. But was she a pawn, or something more valuable? At dawn, Jap burst into Poirot's flat, his face flushed with excitement. We've found her, Poirot, in a cellar. Near Wapping, just like you thought. She's shaken, but alive. No sign of who took her, though. Poirot accompanied Jap to the hospital where Evelyn Hart lay, pale and disoriented, her emerald necklace missing. She could recall nothing of her ordeal, her memory a blank slate from the moment she stepped onto the terrace. The doctors spoke of a possible drug, something to induce amnesia, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. On the bedside table, placed as if by an unseen hand, was another black chess piece of pawn this time. He picked it up, his fingers tracing its smooth surface. The architect had returned Evelyn, but why? To prove their power, to lure Poirot deeper into the game. The word check echoed in his mind, a warning that the next move was his, as he left the hospital. The rain had stopped, and the city glittered under a tentative sun. Poirot's eyes were bright with resolve. The architect had made their second move, and though Evelyn was safe, the game was far from over. The chess pieces, the spiral key, the cryptic notes, they were all part of a larger design, one Poirot was determined to unravel. He slipped the pawn into his pocket, alongside the key and the emerald bead, and stepped into the morning, ready for the next challenge. Chapter 3. The Clockmakers. Cipher. The fog hung low over London, curling through the narrow streets of Clerkenwell like a living thing, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant chime of church bells. Hercule Poirot, clad in a woolen overcoat against the autumn chill, stepped from a hansom cab outside a quaint shop front. The sign above the door read T. Moreau, horologist, its gold lettering faded but proud. The shop's windows were dark, the curtains drawn, and an air of stillness clung to the place, as if time itself had paused within. Poirot's investigation into Evelyn, Hart's abduction, had left him with more questions than answers. The black pawn, the emerald bead, and the cryptic word check were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. Yet the brass key, with its spiral engraving, tucked securely in his waistcoat pocket, felt like a promise of answers. His inquiries had led him here, to the shop of Tobias Moreau, a reclusive clockmaker whose name had surfaced in connection with Victor Crane, the art collector Evelyn had argued with before her disappearance. Crane, it seemed, was a frequent client of Moreau, commissioning intricate timepieces that were more art than function. The bell above the door gave a feeble jangle as Poirot entered. The shop was a labyrinth of ticking clocks, grandfathers, mantelpieces, and pocket watches, their hands moving in a silent symphony. The air smelled of polished wood and oil, and every surface gleamed with meticulous care. But the shop was empty, the counter unattended. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, noting a single anomaly, a small carriage clock on the counter, its hands frozen at 3:33. Curio, Poirot murmured, his gloved fingers hovering over the clock. He called out, "Monsieur Moreau, it is Hercule Poirot, come to speak with you." No answer came. The ticking seemed to grow louder, a chorus of mechanical heartbeats. Poirot moved behind the counter, his instincts prickling. A narrow door led to a workshop in the back, its walls lined with tools and half-assembled timepieces. There, slumped over a workbench, was Tobias Moreau, what remained of him. The clockmaker was dead, his face ashen, his eyes staring blankly at a gear-strewn table. A thin trickle of blood ran from a precise wound at the base of his skull, barely visible beneath his thinning hair. Poirot's heart sank, but his mind sharpened. He examined the body without touching it, noting the absence of struggle. The wound suggested a stiletto or ice pick, wielded with surgical precision. This was no robbery. The shop was undisturbed, the cash box untouched. Poirot's gaze returned to the workbench, where a partially disassembled clock lay, its gears arranged in a peculiar pattern, as if forming a symbol. He leaned closer, his breath catching. The gears formed a spiral, identical to the one on the brass key. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. The architect was here. He searched the workshop, his movements methodical. Beneath a pile of schematics, he found a leather-bound ledger listing Moreau's clients. Victor Crane's name appeared repeatedly, alongside orders for custom clocks with special mechanisms. Poirot tucked the ledger under his arm, then turned his attention to the clock on the workbench. Its back panel was loose, and with a gentle nudge, it came free, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of parchment, inscribed with a series of numbers and letters in Moreau's meticulous hand: 4712, RTV 9-2-5.A cipher. Poirot's pulse quickened. The architect was not content with murder. They were weaving a game within a game, daring him to unravel their secrets. He pocketed the parchment, knowing it held the key to the next move. As he stepped back into the shop, a faint creak came from above. The ceiling was low, with a trapdoor barely visible in the dim light. Poirot hesitated, then retrieved a stool and climbed, his small frame surprisingly agile. The trapdoor opened to a cramped attic, its air thick with dust. A single candle flickered. On a table, illuminating a circle of chairs arranged like a tribunal. In the center was a chessboard, its pieces scattered as if a game had been abandoned mid-play. A black bishop stood alone in the middle, its base engraved with the now familiar spiral. Poirot's mind raced. This was no ordinary attic. It was a meeting place, a sanctum for minds as calculating as the architect's. He examined the chessboard, noting the positions of the pieces. The black bishop was surrounded by white pawns, a conflagration that suggested a trapdoor, a sacrifice. Tucked beneath the board was a folded invitation, its wax seal broken but bearing the spiral emblem. The text was formal, almost archaic. You were cordially invited to the Order of the Spiral, a gathering of those who seek to master the art of strategy. Tonight, we convene to discuss the great design. Discretion is paramount. The date was that evening, the location a private club in Bloomsbury known as the Elysian Rooms. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The architect had left a trail, whether by design or oversight, and he intended to follow it. That night, Poirot arrived. At the Elysian Rooms, a discreet establishment hidden behind an unmarked door on a quiet street. He had donned a less conspicuous suit, trading his usual flair for a subdued grey, though his moustache remained a beacon of his identity. The doorman, a hulking figure with a scar across his cheek, eyed him suspiciously but admitted him after. Poirot presented the invitation. Inside, the club was a study in contrasts. Succulent chandeliers hung over worn velvet chairs, and the air was thick with cigar smoke and whispered conversations. A dozen men and women sat around a long table, their faces half hidden by shadows. They were an eclectic group: a retired general, a mathematician with ink-stained fingers, a society widow draped in black lace. Poirot introduced himself as a consultant, his accent softened to blend in, and took a seat, his eyes scanning for any sign of the architect. The meeting began with a man in a crimson waistcoat, who introduced himself as Dr. Elias Voss, the group's leader. "We are the Order of the Spiral," he said, his voice resonant. "We study the patterns that govern chaos, the designs that shape destiny. Tonight, we welcome a new mind to our circle." Poirot listened as the group discussed abstract theories of strategy, their words laced with metaphors of chess and architecture. But beneath the intellectual veneer, he sensed a current of fear. When he mentioned Tobias Moreau, the room fell silent. Voss's smile tightened. "Poor Tobias," he said, "a brilliant mind, but reckless." He spoke of a benefactor, someone he called the Master Builder, who commissioned his finest work. The Master Builder, Poirot pressed, his tone casual. And who might this be? Voss's eyes flickered. No one knows. Tobias was secretive. Even with us. He said the master builder saw the world as a grand puzzle, one only a few could solve. Poirot's heart thudded. The architect, these people were pawns, unwitting or otherwise, in a game they barely understood. He excused himself, claiming a sudden headache, and slipped out before the meeting ended. The cipher burned in his pocket, its numbers and letters a riddle he was determined to crack. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot spread the cipher on his desk, the ledger and chess piece beside it. The numbers 4712, 9-5 suggested a code, perhaps tied to the ledgers. Entries. He pored over the client list, cross-referencing dates and names. After hours of meticulous work, he noticed a pattern. The numbers corresponded to pages, lines, and words in the ledger. The letters are T, V-word initials of clients whose orders matched the dates. Decoding the message took all night, but by dawn, Poirot had it. King's Cross, Platform 7, midnight. A location and time. The architect was leading him to the next move, but why? Was it a trap or another piece of the puzzle? He telephoned Jap, arranging for discreet surveillance at King's Cross. Be cautious, mon ami, Poirot warned. The architect is always watching. As he prepared to leave, the brass key caught his eye, its spiral gleaming in the morning light. He slipped it into his pocket, alongside the Black Bishop, and stepped into the fog, his mind alight with anticipation. The clockmaker's death was a tragedy, but the cipher's solution was a triumph. The architect had made their move, and Poirot was ready to respond. The game was far from over, but for now he had the advantage. Chapter 4. The train to nowhere. The night was thick with the damp chill of London's autumn, the fog weaving through King's Cross Station like a shroud. Hercule Poirot stood on Platform 7, his overcoat buttoned to the collar, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. The cipher from Tobias Moreau's workshop had led him here, to a midnight rendezvous orchestrated by the architect. The station was nearly deserted, save for a few weary travellers and the hiss of steam from a waiting train. The air thrummed with anticipation, as if the very tracks knew a secret they dared not share. Poirot had arrived early, his mind alert to every detail. Inspector Jap's men were stationed discreetly to constables disguised as porters, another loitering by. The ticket booth, Poirot had insisted on subtlety. The architect was no ordinary foe, and any misstep could prove costly. In his pocket, the brass key with its spiral engraving felt heavier than ever, a talisman of the game he was playing. The train, a sleek locomotive bound for Edinburgh, gleamed under the gaslights. Its destination board read Northern Star, and its carriages were a mix of luxury and mystery, their windows glowing softly. Poirot's ticket, purchased under a pseudonym, granted him access to a first-class compartment. He boarded with a nod to the conductor, a wiry man with a nervous tic, and settled into his seat, his small frame dwarfed by the plush velvet dot. As the train lurched forward, Poirot's senses sharpened. The ciphers, message King's Cross, Platform 7, midnight, had been precise, but its purpose was unclear. Was he to meet someone, find something, or was this another of the architect's traps? He scanned the compartment, noting the polished wood panelling, the crystal decanter on the side table, and the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Everything was in order, yet something felt wrong. A soft knock at the compartment door startled him. A woman entered, her face half hidden by a veiled hat, her dress a deep burgundy that shimmered in the dim light. Monsieur Poirot, she. asked, her voice low, with a trace of an accent he couldn't place. I was told you'd be here. Poirot rose, his manners impeccable despite his wariness. Madame, I am indeed Poirot, and you are. She hesitated, her gloved hands twisting. Call me Clara. I have information about the one you seek. His eyes narrowed. The architect. She nodded, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. I was to deliver a message, but I fear I've been followed. They know you're here. Before Poirot could press her, the train shuddered violently, the lights flickering. A screech of metal echoed through the carriage, and the world tilted. Poirot grabbed the edge of the table, steadying himself as Clara stumbled. Mon Dieu, he exclaimed. What is this? The train slowed, then stopped with a jolt. The compartment door slammed shut, and a click signaled the lock engaging. Poirot tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Clara's eyes widened, her breath quickening. They've done this, she whispered. It's a trap. Poirot's mind raced. The architect had anticipated his presence, orchestrating this moment with chilling precision. He examined the door, finding a concealed mechanism, a lock knot, meant to be opened from within. The windows were sealed, the glass reinforced. They were caged. Calm, Madame Poirot said, his voice steady. Tell me what you know, quickly. Clara's words tumbled out in a rush. I work for a man who calls himself the architect. He hired me to carry messages, to watch people. I don't know his face, only his voice. He said you were dangerous, that you had to be stopped. Tonight, I was to give you this. She reached into her handbag and produced a folded note, its wax seal bearing the spiral emblem. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes scanning the elegant script. You move well, Poirot, but the board is mine. Enjoy the ride. Beneath the words was a crude sketch of a train, its front carriage engulfed in flames. A chill ran through him. Viti, he said, pulling Clara to the floor. We must find a way out. He examined the compartment, his fingers probing for weaknesses. The side table was bolted down, but its underside revealed a hidden latch. With a click, a panel slid open, exposing a narrow crawl space leading to the next carriage. Along why, Poirot urged, gesturing for Clara to follow. The crawl space was cramped, its walls vibrating with the train's idling engine. Poirot moved with surprising agility, his small size an advantage. Clara followed, her breath ragged. As they emerged into the next carriage, a wave of heat hit them. Smoke curled from the corridor ahead, and the crackle of flames was unmistakable. Poirot's mind worked furiously. The architect had diverted the train, locked him in, and now sought to destroy him. But why Clara? Was she a pawn, or part of the design? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on survival. The carriage was empty, its passengers either evacuated or never there to begin with. He found a fire axe mounted on the wall and used it to smash a window, letting in a gust of cold air. Clara, vite, he called, helping her through the window. They dropped onto the gravel beside the tracks. The train now halted in a desolate stretch of countryside, far from any station. The front carriage was ablaze, the fire spreading rapidly. Poirot scanned the darkness, spotting a figure moving in the shadows, a man in a long coat, his face obscured by a scarf. You, Poirot shouted, his voice carrying over the crackle of flames. Show yourself. The figure paused, then raised a hand in a mocking salute before vanishing into the fog. Poirot's fists clenched. The architect, or one of their agents, had Been here, watching. Clara clutched his arm, her face pale. He was at the station. I saw him bored, but he stayed in the shadows. He knew you'd come. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, madame, how did you know to find me? She flinched, her gaze dropping. I was told to board this train, to find the man with the moustache. I didn't know it was a trap until the door locked. Poirot studied her, searching for deceit. Her fear seemed genuine, but he trusted no one in this game. Before he could question her further, the sound of hooves announced Japp's arrival, his men galloping from a nearby road. The inspector leaped from his horse, his face a mix of relief and exasperation. Poirot, you're alive. What the devil happened here? Poirot recounted the events, omitting Clara's role for now. Japp's men arrested her as a witness, though she protested her innocence. The train, they learned, had been diverted onto a disused spur, its crew mysteriously absent. The fire was no accident. A crude, incendiary device had been planted in the engine. As the police secured the scene, Poirot found a moment to examine the note Clara had given him. Tucked inside was a tiny brass cog, its edge etched with a spiral design. It matched the key, the chess pieces, the gears in Moreau's workshop. The architect was weaving a web of symbols, each a clue to their next move. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat by his fire, the cog and note on his desk. Japp had promised to investigate Clara's story, but Poirot suspected she was a minor player, manipulated by a mastermind. The train to nowhere had been a test, a bold attempt to eliminate him. Yet the architect had allowed him to escape, leaving another clue in their wake. He opened his notebook, adding the cog and the note's words to his growing list of evidence. The architect was playing a dangerous game, but Poirot was no mere pawn. The fire, the locked compartment, the mocking salute, they were all part of the design. And now, with the cog in hand, Poirot had a new piece of the puzzle as dawn broke. He stood at his window, the city stirring below. The architect had made their move, and he had survived. But the game was escalating, and the next challenge loomed. Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve. He would follow the spiral, wherever it led, and bring the architect to justice. Chapter 5. The Masquerade, Ball. The city of light glittered under a velvet sky, its boulevards alive with the hum of Paris at night. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a tailored black tuxedo, adjusted his silk mask as he stepped from a chauffeured car outside the Palais Garnier. The opera house loomed like a cathedral of opulence, its golden facade aglow with torchlight for the annual bal masque, a grand affair drawing Europe's elite. Poirot's invitation, secured through discreet inquiries, was a forgery of impeccable quality, his own handiwork, crafted to infiltrate the event where whispers placed the architect's next move. The brass cog from the train incident, etched with the spiral emblem, had yielded no immediate answers, but Poirot's instincts told him it was a key to something greater. Clara, the mysterious woman from the train, had vanished from police custody, her escape a troubling sign of the architect's reach. The note from the train you move well, Poirot, but the board is minor code in his mind, a taunt that fueled his determination. Tonight he would turn the tables. Inside, the Palais Garnier was a whirlwind of colour and sound. Masked figures in elaborate costumes swirled across the marble floor, their laughter mingling with the strains of a waltz. Chandeliers cast prisms of light, illuminating gowns adorned with feathers and jewels. Poirot, his mask, a sleek raven design, that accentuated his piercing eyes, moved through the crowd with the grace of a panther. He was not here to dance, but to hunt. The gala was a cover, he suspected, for a transaction orchestrated by the architect. Rumors had surfaced of a priceless artifactor, sapphire-encrusted reliquary known as the Star of St. Denisbean, offered to a select group of bidders. The relic, stolen from a private collection in Vienna, was said to hold historical secrets. Its value incalculable. Poirot's sources, including a nervous informant in Paris's underworld, pointed to the masquerade as the stage for its sale. He scanned the crowd, noting the subtle cues of power and deception. A woman in a peacock mask whispered to a man in a gilded lion's face, their gestures too deliberate for mere flirtation. A figure in a hooded cloak lingered by a pillar, their eyes tracking every movement. Poirot's gaze settled on a man in a silver harlequin costume, his posture exuding confidence. The man's mask revealed only a sharp jawline and a smile that was both charming and predatory. Could this be the architect or another of their operatives? Poirot approached a refreshment table, feigning interest in a glass of champagne while eavesdropping on a nearby conversation. To men, their masks, adorned with crimson feathers, spoke in hushed tones about the star and a private viewing in the opera house's upper gallery. Poirot's pulse quickened. He slipped through the crowd, ascending a spiral staircase to the gallery, its walls lined with gilded mirrors that reflected the chaos below. The upper gallery was quieter, its shadows deeper. Poirot moved silently, his polished shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. At the far end, a velvet curtain concealed a private alcove. He parted it to find a small group gathered around a pedestal where the Star of St. Denis gleamed under a single spotlight. The sapphire reliquary was breathtaking, its intricate filigree pulsing with history. The harlequin-masked man stood. At its center, his voice smooth as he addressed the group. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you see before you a treasure beyond price. Bidding begins at 1,000,000 francs, but only for those who understand its true value." Poirot lingered. At the edge, his mask concealing his scrutiny. "The bidders 5 in all, their identities hidden," murmured excitedly. But their questions were met with cryptic responses. The harlequin, whom Poirot now suspected was a key player, gestured to a woman in a silver gown, her mask a cascade of diamonds. She produced a leather case, presumably for the reliquary's transport. Before the bidding could begin, Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Pardon, Madame et Messieurs, but I wonder if this relic is truly what it seems. A forgery, perhaps." The room froze. The harlequin's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing behind his mask. "And who are you to question its authenticity?" "A curious observer," Poirot replied, his tone light but laced with steel. "One who knows the Star of St. Denis was last seen in Vienna, not Paris. How did it come to be here?" The woman in the silver gown stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You're out of your depth, monsieur. Leave now, or regret it." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Moi, I regret only the lack of truth, and I suspect this reliquary is but a piece in a larger game." The tension snapped like a taut wire. The harlequin clapped his hands, and the lights in the alcove flickered out. A puff of smoke filled the air, thick with the acrid scent of chemicals. Poirot coughed, his eyes watering as he stumbled back. When the smoke cleared, the relic was gone, the pedestal empty. The bidders had vanished, and the harlequin and the woman were nowhere to be seen. "Sacre bleu," Poirot muttered, his composure shaken. He searched the alcove, finding only a single sapphire fragment on the floor, its edge etched with the spiral design. The architect had outmaneuvered him again, staging the theft under his nose. But the fragment was a clue, a deliberate breadcrumb, left to taunt him. He descended to the ballroom, where the revelry continued, unaware of the drama above. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the night's events. The harlequin was likely the architect's operative, the woman his accomplice. The reliquary's theft was not about money but power. Its secrets, perhaps, were the true prize. And the spiral, always the spiral, tied it to the courier's murder, Evelyn Hart's abduction, and the clockmaker's death, as he left the Palais Garnier. Poirot paused under a street lamp, examining the sapphire fragment. It was part of the reliquary's base, and carved into its underside was a riddle, where shadows dance and secrets sleep, find the heart that does not weep. The words were cryptic, but they pointed to a new target, another move in the architect's game. Back at his hotel, Poirot sat by a roaring fire, the fragment and riddle before him. He opened his notebook, adding the night's events to his meticulous record. The masquerade had been a spectacle of deception, but he had gained something, a clue to the next stage. The architect was bold, staging their schemes amidst Paris's elite, but Poirot was undeterred. The sapphire fragment gleamed in the firelight, a promise of answers yet to come. He closed his eyes, the waltz from the ballroom echoing in his memory. The game was growing more dangerous, each move more audacious. But Hercule Poirot was no stranger to danger. He would follow the riddle, unravel the spiral, and bring the architect's grand design crashing down. For now, he had survived the masquerade, and that was victory enough. Chapter 6. The Poisoned Chalice. The rain returned to London with a vengeance. Drumming against the windows of the Savoy Hotel, where Hercule Poirot had taken temporary residence after his Paris escapade, the sapphire fragment from the Palais Garnier, with its enigmatic riddle where shadows dance and secrets sleep, find the heart that does not weep, lay on his desk, catching the lamplight like a frozen tear. Poirot's mind churned, the riddle a tantalizing thread in the architect's intricate tapestry. The spiral emblem, now a constant in his encounters, linked the courier's murder, Evelyn Hart's abduction, the clockmaker's death, and the reliquary's theft. Each incident was a move in a game he was only beginning to understand. A sharp rap at the door broke his reverie. It was Captain Hastings, his old friend and occasional confidant, his face flushed with urgency beneath his tweed cap. "Poirot, you're needed at once. There's been a ghastly business at the Claridge's. Sir Alistair Gray, the diplomat, collapsed at a banquet. They're saying it's poison." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his moustache twitching. "Poison. Mon ami. This is no coincidence. A long way." The Claridge's dining room was a scene of controlled chaos when they arrived. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over tables strewn with abandoned plates, the air thick with the scent of roasted pheasant and panic. Guests in evening attire whispered behind gloved hands, while Scotland Yard officers cordoned off the area. Sir Alistair Gray, a key figure in Anglo-French trade negotiations, lay covered by a white cloth, his body discreetly moved to a side room. Inspector Japp, looking more harried than usual, greeted Poirot with a grimace. "Another mess, Poirot," Japp said, wiping his brow. Gray was toasting the French ambassador when he clutched his throat and dropped dead. "The doctors suspect poison's something fast and rare. We're waiting on the coroner, but the guests are clamoring to leave." Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the overturned goblet on the head table, its contents staining the linen. The chalice, Inspector. It must be examined, and the guest list every name, s'il vous plaît. Japp nodded, barking orders to his men. Poirot approached the table, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The goblet was ornate, silver with filigree that bore a faint spiral, pattern subtle but unmistakable. He sniffed the rim, detecting a bitter undertone beneath. The wine's bouquet curio, he murmured. This is no ordinary poison. Hastings hovered at his shoulder, his face pale. You think it's him, don't you? The architect chap? Oui, Hastings, Poirot replied, his voice low. Sir Alister was a man of influence, a target of significance. The architect does not strike at random. This is another piece on their board. Poirot interviewed the waitstaff, his questions precise. A young server, trembling under his scrutiny, recalled a man in a waiter's uniform delivering the goblet to Sir Alister's place. He wasn't one of us, sir, the boy stammered, tall, with a scar on his cheek. He vanished after the toast. The description matched the doorman at the Elysian rooms, a connection that set Poirot's mind ablaze. He requested a sample of the wine, sending it to a trusted chemist for analysis. Meanwhile, he studied the guest list, noting the presence of several familiar names: Lord Hart, Evelyn's father, Victor Crane, the art collector, and a newcomer, Madame Celeste Dubois, a French philanthropist with rumoured ties to the black market. Poirot sought out Madame Dubois, finding her in a quiet corner, her emerald green gown shimmering like a serpent's scales. Her eyes, sharp, behind a lace fan, met his with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her accent Parisian, I've heard of your exploits. A pity about Sir Alister. He was formidable. Indeed, Madame Poirot replied, his tone courteous but probing. And what brings you to this banquet? A charitable cause, or something more personal? Her smile was enigmatic. Charity, of course. Though I confess, Sir Alister and I had business dealings. He was keen to secure certain artifacts for the British Museum. Poirot's interest piqued. Artifacts such as the Star of St. Denis. Madame Dubois's fan paused mid-flutter. You are well informed, monsieur, but the star is gone, is it not? Stolen in Paris, or so the rumours say. Before Poirot could press further, a constable interrupted with news from the chemist. The poison was identified as tetrodotoxin, a rare toxin derived from pufferfish, deadly in minute doses and nearly untraceable. Its source was likely the black market, a lead that pointed to London's shadowy underworld. Poirot excused himself, his mind racing. The spiral on the goblet, the scar-faced man, the toxin's rarity all bore the architect's signature. But why Sir Alister? Was it his diplomatic influence, or something tied to the artifacts Madame Dubois mentioned? Poirot recalled the riddle from the sapphire fragment, where shadows dance and secrets sleep. The banquet, with its glittering facade and hidden motives, fit the description perfectly. Determined to trace the poison's source, Poirot and Hastings ventured to Limehouse, a district where the Thamers's murky waters mirrored the city's underbelly. Their destination was a dimly lit apothecary shop run by a man known as the chemist, a notorious dealer in rare substances. The shop was a maze of shelves, cluttered with vials and jars that glowed faintly in the gloom. The chemist, a wiry figure with eyes like chipped flint, greeted them with a sneer. "What's a dandy like you doing in my shop?" he asked, eyeing Poirot's pristine suit. "I seek information," Poirot said, unfazed. "Tetrodotoxin. A man was poisoned tonight, and I believe you know who supplied it." The chemist's sneer faltered. I don't deal in that stuff. Too dangerous, even for me. Poirot leaned closer, his voice soft but commanding. Monsieur, do not play games with Hercule Poirot. The architects sent me, and they do not tolerate lies. The name had the desired effect. The chemist's eyes widened, and he backed away, knocking over a jar of dried herbs. I only filled an order. A man came last week, paid in cash, said it was for a private collector. I didn't ask questions. Describe him, Poirot demanded. Tall, scarred cheek, wore a long coat. That's all I know, I swear. Before Poirot could press further, a shadow moved in the back of the shop. A figure lunged, a blade glinting in the lamplight. Poirot sidestepped, pulling Hastings out of harm's way as the attacker, wiry man with a scarred cheek, fled through a rear door. The chemist screamed, clutching a shallow cut on his arm, and collapsed. Vite Hastings, Poirot shouted, giving chase. The alley outside was a labyrinth of crates and refuse, but the attacker was gone, swallowed by the night. Poirot returned to the shop, where the chemist lay dead, a second blade embedded in his chest. A note was pinned to his coat, written in the architect's elegant script. Loose ends are untidy, Poirot. Poirot's jaw tightened. The architect was tying up their tracks, eliminating anyone who could lead him closer. But the night was not lost. As he searched the shop, he found a ledger, hidden beneath a floorboard, listing transactions for rare toxins. One entry caught his eye, a shipment of tetrodotoxin to an address in Mayfair, linked to a second target, a banker named Lord Percival Wren, who had been at the banquet. Poirot acted swiftly, contacting Japp to secure Wren's safety. By dawn, they reached Wren's residence, finding him shaken but alive, his morning tea laced with the same toxin. Poirot's timely intervention saved the banker, who confessed to receiving threats warning him to abandon a financial deal with French investors, a deal Sir Alister had championed as Poirot left Wren's home. The rain had ceased, leaving a city washed clean but no less dangerous. The ledger, the spile-marked goblet, and the note were added to his growing collection of clues. The architect had struck at power, targeting men who shaped nations, but Poirot had thwarted their second kill. It was a small victory, but the game was far from over. The riddle's words echoed in his mind, pointing to a heart that did not weep. He would find it, and with it, the architect's next move. Chapter 7. The House of Mirrors. The mist clung to the rolling hills of Kent, veiling the countryside in a ghostly haze as Hercule Poirot's car wound its way toward Blackthorn Manor, the riddle from the sapphire fragment where shadows dance and secrets sleep. Find the heart that does not weep had gnawed at his mind since the poisoned chalice incident. The ledger from the Limehouse apothecary had revealed a curious detail, a delivery of tetrodotoxin to an address linked to Blackthorn Manor, the secluded estate of Judge Mortimer Langley, a man known for his unyielding verdicts and rumoured ties to the same financial circles as Sir Alister, Grey and Lord Percival Wren. Poirot suspected the judge was the architect's next target, and the riddle's heart that does not weep pointed to Langley's reputation for cold impartiality. The manor loomed into view, its Gothic spires piercing the fog like jagged teeth. Its windows were dark, save for a single flicker of light on the upper floor. Poirot stepped from the car, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the gravel drive. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, followed, his face etched with unease. "This place gives me the creeps, Poirot," he muttered, clutching his umbrella like a weapon. "Feels like something out of a ghost story." "Mon ami, it is not ghosts we face, but a mind most cunning, Poirot replied, his voice steady. The architect weaves their web here. We must be vigilant. The butler, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks, greeted them at the door. Judge Langley is not receiving visitors, he said, his tone as cold as the stone walls. He has been unwell. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Monsieur, I am Hercule Poirot, and I come on a matter of life and death. Inform the judge. See. Vous plot. Reluctantly, the butler led them into a grand hall dominated by a chandelier that swayed faintly, casting fractured light across a polished floor. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, and an eerie silence prevailed, broken only by the distant creak of floorboards. The butler disappeared upstairs, leaving Poirot and Hastings to wait. Poirot's gaze roamed the hall, landing on a peculiar feature, a corridor lined with mirrors, their gilded frames reflecting an endless maze of images. Interesting, he murmured, stepping toward the mirrors. Each one was slightly misaligned, creating a disorienting effect that made the corridor seem to twist and bend. A house of mirrors, Hastings, a place where truth is distorted. Before Hastings could respond, a blood-curdling scream echoed from above. Poirot sprang into action, his small frame darting up the staircase with surprising speed. Hastings followed, his longer strides barely keeping pace. They reached a landing where the butler lay crumpled, his throat slashed, a look of terror frozen on his face. Poirot knelt, checking for a pulse, but the man was gone. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, his eyes scanning the scene. A trail of blood led to a heavy oak door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open, revealing a study lined with legal tomes and a massive desk. The room was empty, but a window stood open, its curtains fluttering in the damp breeze. Judge Langley was nowhere to be seen. Poirot's mind raced. The architect had struck again, but where was the judge? He examined the desk, finding a legal document a ruling against a powerful shipping magnate, Victor Crane, among the plaintiffs. The connection to the art collector tightened the web. Then, in the desk drawer, Poirot found a black chess piece, rooket's base etched with the spiral emblem. A note was tucked beneath it. The judge is judged Poirot. Find him, if you can. Another game, Poirot said, his voice grim. The architect plays with lives as if they were pieces on a board. Hastings, pale but resolute, pointed to the open window. They must have taken him that way. Shall we search the grounds? Nan, Hastings, Poirot said, his eyes returning to the corridor of mirrors visible through the open door. The answer lies within. The riddle speaks of shadows dancing. This house, with its mirrors, is where secrets sleep. They returned to the mirrored corridor, its reflections creating a kaleidoscope of their own images. Poirot moved slowly, his fingers brushing the frames. One mirror, slightly warmer to the touch, gave a faint click when pressed. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "A long way," Poirot said, lighting a small lantern from the hall. The staircase spiraled downward, its stone walls damp and moss-licked. The air grew colder, the silence oppressive. At the bottom was a chamber, its walls lined with more mirrors, each reflecting the lanterns, glow into a dazzling array of light. In the center stood Judge Langley, bound to a chair, his eyes wide with fear but alive. A mechanical contraption loomed above him, a lattice of steel beams and gears, poised to collapse if triggered. "Monsieur le Juge," Poirot called softly. "Do not move." Langley's voice was hoarse. "It's a trap, Poirot. The moment you step closer, it activates. They said you'd come. Poirot studied the mechanism, his mind dissecting its design. The gears bore the same spiral pattern, linking it to the architect. A tripwire, nearly invisible, stretched across the floor. He motioned for Hastings to stay back, then carefully stepped over the wire, his movements precise as a dancer's. The contraption groaned but held. "Courage," Poirot said, reaching Langley. He examined the ropes, finding them laced with a thin wire connected to the mechanism. Cutting them would trigger the collapse. Instead, he traced the wire to a control box hidden behind a mirror. With steady hands, he disconnected it, the gears. Falling silent, Langley slumped in relief as Poirot untied him. "They came last night," the judge whispered. "A man with a scar and another, their leader. They spoke of a plan, something about reshaping the world." Poirot helped him to his feet, his mind racing. The scarred man, again likely the same who delivered the poisoned chalice, but the leader, the architect, remained a shadow. As they ascended, Poirot noticed a small object on the chamber floor, a brass gear, its spiral matching the key and cog. He pocketed it, another piece of the puzzle. Back in the hall, Hastings called for the local police, who arrived to secure the manor. Langley, shaken but unharmed, confirmed the document on his desk was the motive a ruling that had thwarted a syndicate's plans, with Victor Crane at its heart. The architect, it seemed, was targeting those who disrupted their grand design. As Poirot left Blackthorn Manor, the fog was lifting, revealing a sky streaked with dawn. The rook and gear joined his collection of clues, each spiral a thread in the architect's web. The judge was safe, a victory against the odds, but the trap had been a message. The architect was watching, anticipating his every move. The riddle's heart that did not weep had been found, but the game was far from over. Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve as he stepped into the car, ready for the next challenge in this deadly dance. Chapter 8. The Stolen Manuscript. The streets of Oxford shimmered under a rare autumn sun, the spires of its ancient colleges piercing a sky as clear as glass. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking on the cobblestones, navigated the bustling quadrangles of the Bodleian Library with a sense of purpose. The riddle from the sapphire fragment where shadows dance and secrets sleep. Find the heart that does not weep had led him here, to the heart of academic England, where secrets were indeed buried in dusty tomes. The brass gear from Blackthorn Manor, etched with the spiral emblem, had pointed to a new clue, a rare manuscript, rumoured to contain the coded secrets of a lost Byzantine empire, had been stolen from the library's restricted collection. Poirot suspected the architect's hand, their pattern of targeting objects of immense influence now unmistakable. The theft had occurred 2 nights prior, during a private viewing for select scholars. The manuscript, known as the Codex Aureus, was a fragile volume of gold-leafed parchment, its cryptic text undeciphered for centuries. Its disappearance had sent shockwaves through academic circles, and Poirot's inquiries revealed a connection to Victor Crane, whose name appeared yet again, this time as a donor to the library's restoration fund. The architect, it seemed, was weaving a web that entangled power, knowledge, and deception. Poirot entered the Bodleian's Duke Humphrey's library, its vaulted ceiling and ancient shelves exuding a reverence for knowledge. The librarian, Dr. Margaret Henshaw, a wiry woman with sharp eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses, greeted him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice crisp, "I was told to expect you." "Scotland Yard's involvement suggests This is more than a simple theft. Oui, Madame Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. The Codex Aureus is no ordinary book. Tell me, who had access to it before it vanished? Dr. Henshaw led him to a secured reading room, its walls lined with locked cabinets. Only 3 scholars were present that night, she said. Professor Edmund Lyle, a Byzantine expert, Dr. Clara Vernon, a cryptologist, and Mr. Theodore Blackwood, a private collector. They were vetted, but, well, the manuscript was there one moment, gone the next. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and no alarms, no signs of forced entry. None, she admitted. The room was locked, the guards stationed outside. It's as if the manuscript evaporated. Poirot examined the reading room, his fingers brushing. The oak table where the codex had last been seen. A faint scratch on the wood caught his attention, a spiral, barely visible, etched with a sharp tool. Interessant, he murmured. The architect's signature was everywhere, taunting him with its persistence. He requested to speak with the scholars, starting with Professor Lyle, a stooped man with a nervous tic. Lyle claimed to have been studying the Codex's illuminations. When the lights flickered briefly, a distraction that allowed the theft, Dr. Vernon, the cryptologist, was more guarded, her answers clipped. I was analyzing the text's cipher, she said, but I saw nothing unusual. Blackwood was the last to handle it. Theodore Blackwood, the collector, was a wiry man with a hawkish face and a penchant for dramatic gestures. His Oxford home, a cluttered townhouse filled with artifacts, was Poirot's next stop. Blackwood greeted him with a forced smile, his eyes darting to a locked cabinet in his study. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I had no part in this. The Codex is priceless, but I'm no thief. Monsieur Blackwood, Poirot said, his voice smooth but probing, you are a collector, Nan, and collectors, they sometimes desire what cannot be bought. Tell me, did you know Victor Crane? Blackwood's smile faltered. Crane, yes, we've done business. He suggested I bid on the Codex if it ever came to auction. But it was never for sale. Poirot's mind raced. Crane, again, was the thread connecting each crime. He pressed Blackwood, noting the man's growing unease. And did Crane mention a benefactor, someone called the architect? Blackwood's face paled. I don't know any architect. I swear I only wanted to study the Codex. Before Poirot could respond, a crash echoed from the back of the house. He sprang to his feet, following the sound to a conservatory where glass littered the floor, a window shattered. Blackwood gasped, they're here, and bolted toward a rear door. Poirot gave chase, his small frame weaving through the cluttered rooms with surprising agility. The pursuit led to an alley behind the townhouse, where Blackwood stumbled, his coat catching on a fence. Poirot caught up, grabbing his arm. Monsieur, where are you running? What do you fear? Blackwood's eyes were wild. They'll kill me. I was told to keep quiet, to say nothing about the manuscript. They said it was part of a larger plan. Something about power beyond nations. Who? Poirot demanded. The architect. Before Blackwood could answer, a shadow moved in the Elia figure in a long coat, their face obscured by a scarf. A glint of steel flashed, and Poirot shoved Blackwood aside, the blade grazing his sleeve. The attacker fled, but not before. Dropping a small object of brass key, its spiral emblem matching Poirot's collection. Police sirens wailed as Hastings, summoned by Poirot's earlier call, arrived with local officers. Blackwood was taken into custody, babbling about threats and a grand design. Poirot searched the conservatory, finding a hidden safe behind a false panel. Inside was the Codex Aureus, its gold pages intact, but for a single sheet torn out, replaced with a note in the architect's script. "Knowledge is power, Poirot, but power is fleeting." Poirot's heart sank. The stolen page was the key, likely containing the cipher's secrets. He examined the codex, its remaining text a labyrinth of symbols. Tucked within its binding was a Kluwer folded map of London, marked with a single location, an auction house in Mayfair, dated for the following night. The missing page, he suspected, would be there, offered to the highest bidder, as he left Blackwood's home. The sun dipped below the spires, casting long shadows. The codex was recovered, a triumph that restored a piece of history, but the stolen page was a loss that stung. The architect had manipulated Blackwood, using him as a pawn to distract Poirot while the true prize slipped away. The map, however, was a lead, a new move in the game. Back at his hotel, Poirot spread the map on his desk, the spiral key and gear beside it. The auction house was a den of wealth and secrecy, the perfect stage for the architect's next act. He added the note and map to his notebook, each clue a thread in the unraveling tapestry. Blackwood's fear, the scarred attacker, the missing Pagel pointed to a scheme larger than he had imagined. The architect was playing for stakes beyond mere crime, and Poirot was determined to uncover their endgame. For now, he had the codex and a new destination, and that was enough to keep him in the chase. Chapter 9. The Silent Auction. The Mayfair auction house stood discreetly behind an unassuming Georgian facade, its windows shuttered against the prying eyes of London's elite. Hercule Poirot, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that blended seamlessly with the evening's elegance, clutched the forged invitation that had secured his entry. The map from the Codex Aureus, marked with this location and tonight's date, had led him here to a clandestine auction rumored to involve the stolen page of the manuscript. The architect's shadow loomed large, their spiral emblem a constant reminder of the game's escalating stakes. Poirot's collection of clues, the brass key, the gear, the chess pieces, the sapphire fragments burned in his mind, each a piece of a puzzle that refused to resolve. The interior of the auction house was a study in opulence, its walls draped in crimson velvet, its air thick with the scent of cigar smoke and old money. The attendees, a select group of perhaps 20, wore tailored masks of silk and leather, their identities concealed as per the auction's rules. Poirot's mask, a minimalist silver design, allowed his piercing green eyes to scan the room unimpeded. He noted the guarded postures, the whispered exchanges, the glint of jewels that spoke of wealth and ambition. This was no ordinary auction. It was a gathering of power brokers, and the architect was surely among them. Or at least their hand was at work. A woman in a sapphire blue gown, her mask adorned with peacock feathers, approached the podium. Her voice, smooth and commanding, silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's exclusive offering. Our first lot is a singular artifact, a page from the Codex Aureus, inscribed with secrets lost to time. Bidding begins at £500,000. Poirot's heart quickened. The stolen page, as he had suspected, was the prize. He positioned himself near the back, his posture casual but his senses alert. The bidders raised discreet paddles, their offers climbing rapidly. Among them was a man in a black velvet mask, his movements precise, his voice clipped as he bid. Aggressively, Poirot recognized the cadence Victor Crane, the art collector whose name threaded through every crime. Crane's presence confirmed the architect's involvement, but was he a pawn or a player? Poirot raised his paddle, entering the bidding to draw attention. The woman at the podium glanced his way, her eyes narrowing behind her mask. "A new contender," she said, a hint of amusement in her tone. £1,000,000 from the gentleman in silver. The room stirred, whispers rippling like a breeze. Crane's head turned, his gaze locking onto Poirot. The air grew taut, the game shifting. Poirot bid again, pushing the price to an audacious 2 million. His goal was not to win, but to unsettle, to flush out the architect's operative. The strategy worked. Crane leaned toward a woman in a crimson mask, whispering urgently. She nodded, slipping through a side door. Poirot followed, his movements silent as he navigated a corridor lined with gilt-framed portraits. The woman entered a private room, its door ajar. Inside, she conferred with a man whose scarred cheek was unmistakable, the same figure who had attacked in Limehouse and fled Blackthorn Manor. Poirot eavesdropped, catching fragments of their conversation. The page must not fall to him. The architect's orders: dispose of the problem. The scarred man nodded, drawing a silenced pistol from his coat. Poirot's pulse raced, but his mind remained clear. He retreated, seeking a vantage point. The corridor led to a balcony overlooking the auction room, where the bidding had reached a fever pitch. The woman in sapphire returned to the podium, her composure unshaken. 3 million, going once. Before she could continue, a commotion erupted below. A bitter, portly man in a gold mask clutched his chest and collapsed, his paddle clattering to the floor. The room froze, then erupted in chaos as guests scrambled for the exits. Poirot's eyes darted to the scarred man, who was moving through the crowd, his pistol concealed but ready. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered, realizing the collapse was a diversion. He descended the stairs, weaving through panicked guests, his small frame an advantage in the crush. The scarred man was heading for a rear exit, a leather case in hand likely containing the codex page. Poirot followed, but the crowd slowed him, and a sudden blow to his shoulder sent him stumbling. A masked figure, their face obscured, hissed, "Stay out of this, detective." Before vanishing into the melee, Poirot recovered, his shoulder throbbing but his resolve intact. He reached the exit, finding the scarred man in an alley, about to climb into a waiting car. "Arrête!" Poirot shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The man turned, his pistol raised, but Poirot was faster, hurling a heavy silver cigarette case from his pocket. It struck the man's wrist, sending the gun skittering across the cobblestones. The scarred man cursed, clutching the leather case, and diving into the car. The engine roared, and the vehicle sped off, leaving Poirot in the dust. But not empty-handed. A single sheet of paper had fallen from the case during the scuffle. Poirot retrieved it, his breath catching as he recognized the codex's gold-leafed script. It was not the full page, but a fragment, its text a dense cipher. Tucked within its folds was a list of names prominent figures in finance, politics, and academia, each marked with a spiral. Poirot returned to the auction house, where Japp's men had arrived to manage the chaos. The collapsed bidder, thankfully, had suffered only a fainting spell, likely induced by a mild toxin in his winer distraction, not a murder. The woman in sapphire and crane had vanished, but the fragment and list were a significant prize. Poirot handed the fragment to Japp for safekeeping, keeping the list for himself. Back at his hotel, Poirot spread the list on his desk, the spiral key and gear beside it. The names Lord Hart, Sir Alistair Gray, Judge Langley, and others formed a pattern of influence, each targeted by the architect. The ciphered fragment, though incomplete, hinted at a larger scheme, its symbols echoing the Codex's secrets. Poirot's mind churned. The riddle's words find the heart that does not weep, taking on new meaning. The architect's heart. Was their ambition, cold and unyielding, driving a plan to control power itself? The night's chaos had yielded a breakthrough, but at a cost. The architect had slipped through his fingers again, their operative escaping with the full Codex page. Yet the list was a map to their targets, a guide to their next move. Poirot added it to his notebook, his resolve hardening. The silent auction had been a battle of wits, and though the architect had won the round, Poirot had gained ground. The game was far from over, and he was ready to strike back. Chapter 10. The betrayal of the London dawn was a muted affair. The sky draped in clouds that mirrored the weight in Hercule Poirot's heart. He sat in his temporary quarters at the Savoy, the list of names from the silent auction spread before him like a map of treachery. Each name Lord Hart, Sir Alistair Gray, Judge Langley, and others was a thread in the architect's web, a network of influence targeted for disruption. The spiral marked Kluski gear, chess pieces, sapphire. Fragments sat neatly arranged on his desk, their silent presence a reminder of the game's relentless pace. Yet a new unease gnawed at him, one born not of clues but of trust. Captain Hastings, his steadfast companion through countless cases, had been unusually distant since the auction. His jovial demeanor had given way to furtive glances and terse replies, a shift Poirot had noticed but attributed to the strain of their pursuit. Now, as he prepared to follow the list's next leader, reclusive financier named Sir Roland Baxter, Poirot's instincts whispered of betrayal. The telephone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning's quiet. Poirot answered, expecting Jap with updates on the auction's aftermath. Instead, a familiar voice, strained and hesitant, greeted him. Poirot, it's Hastings. I need to see you. It's urgent. Mon ami, where are you? Poirot asked, his tone calm but alert, at the Crown and Anchor near the docks. Come alone, please. I can't explain over the phone. The line went dead. Poirot's moustache twitched, his mind racing. The Crown and Anchor was a rough pub in a part of London where shadows held sway. Hastings' request to come alone was, unlike him, a red flag in a game already fraught with deception. Yet Poirot could not ignore his friend's plea. He donned his overcoat, slipping the spiral key into his pocket, and hailed a cab to the docks. The pub was a squat den, its patrons a mix of dock workers and shifty figures who eyed Poirot's pristine attire with suspicion. Hastings sat in a corner booth, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with a half-empty pint. He looked up as Poirot approached, his eyes haunted. Poirot, Hastings whispered, I've done something terrible. Poirot slid into the booth, his expression unreadable. Speak, mon ami. What troubles you? Hastings' voice trembled. They got to me, Poirot. The architect's people. They threatened my sister, Clara. Said they'd kill her if I didn't help them. Poirot's heart sank, but his voice remained steady. What did you do, Hastings? I leaked your plans, Hastings confessed, his head bowing. After the auction, I told them you had the list of names. They wanted to know your next move, where you'd go. I didn't want to, Poirot, I swear. They showed me a photo of Clara, bound and gagged, in some godforsaken cellar. Poirot's eyes softened, though his mind was a storm of calculation. When did this begin? 2 days ago, Hastings said, his voice breaking. After Blackthorn Manor, a man with a scarred cheek approached me outside my club. He gave me a phone number, said to call if I valued Clara's life. I called them last night, after you showed me the list. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The betrayal stung, but he understood Hastings' dilemma. The architect had exploited his friend's loyalty, turning it into a weapon, yet the confession was a chance to turn the tables. Mon ami, you have been foolish, but not unforgivable. Tell me, what did they ask of you next? Hastings swallowed hard. They want me to lure you to a warehouse in Shadwell tonight. They said it's where they'll deal with you. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then we shall use their trap against them. But first, we must ensure your sister's safety. He contacted Jap, arranging for a discreet search for Clara Hastings, using the description of the cellar from Evelyn Hart's ordeal as a starting point. Meanwhile, Poirot devised a plan. Hastings, you will play your part. Contact the architect's man, confirm the meeting, but we shall be prepared. That night, Poirot and Hastings approached the Shadwell warehouse, a hulking structure by the Thames, its windows black as pitch. Jap's men, hidden in the shadows, awaited Poirot's signal. Hastings, wired with nerves, carried a concealed transmitter, a precaution Poirot had insisted upon. "Stay calm, mon ami," Poirot whispered. "We are the hunters now." Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and rusted machinery, lit by flickering lanterns. A figure emerged from the darkness, the scarred man, his pistol glinting. "You came, Poirot," he said, his voice a low growl, "and you brought the traitor." Poirot stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "Monsieur, it is you who are betrayed. Your master's game is flawed." The scarred man laughed, but his mirth was cut short by a faint click, the sound of Jap's men moving into position. Poirot had anticipated an ambush, and Hastings' transmitter had relayed their location. The scarred man raised his pistol, but before he could fire, a constable's whistle pierced the air. Chaos erupted as police swarmed the warehouse. There, torches slicing through the gloom. The scarred man fled, disappearing into a side passage, but not before dropping a small object, a black chess piece, a knight, its spiral emblem gleaming. Poirot retrieved it, his heart pounding. The architect had anticipated his countermove, but they had underestimated his resolve. As the police secured the warehouse, Jap emerged, his face grim. "We found Clara Hastings, Poirot. She's safe, locked in a cellar 2 streets over. Looks like they moved her after Evelyn Hart's rescue." Hastings sagged with relief, tears in his eyes. "Poirot, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mon ami, trust is a fragile thing, but it can be mended. You have redeemed yourself tonight." Back at the Savoy, Poirot added the night to his collection, its spiral joining the key, gear, and other clues. The list of names, now safe in Jap's hands, was a map to the architect's targets. But the warehouse trap had revealed something more. The architect's confidence was growing, their moves bolder. Yet Poirot had turned their scheme against them, saving Clara and foiling their ambush as he sat by the fire. The riddle's words echoed, "Find the heart that does not weep." The architect's heart was cold, but Hastings was not. His betrayal, born of love, had been undone by loyalty. The game was far from over, but Poirot had won this round, restoring trust and gaining a new piece of the puzzle. The next move awaited, and he was ready. Chapter 11. The architect's lair. The Thames glittered like a ribbon of ink under the moonless London sky, its waters whispering secrets as Hercule Poirot stepped from a cab onto the cobbled street of Dark. The black chestnut from the Shadwell warehouse, its spiral emblem etched into its base, lay heavy in his pocket, a taunt from the architect. The list of names from the silent auction had pointed him here, to an abandoned theatre known as the Lyceum Shadow, a relic of Victorian grandeur now crumbling into obscurity. The riddle where shadows dance and secrets sleep. Find the heart that does not weep seem to pulse in the air. The theatre's darkened marquee, a fitting stage for the architect's next move. Poirot's heart beat steadily, his mind a whirl. Of precision, the architect had outmaneuvered him at every turn, from Evelyn Hart's abduction to the poisoned chalice, the stolen codex page, and Hastings' betrayal. Yet each encounter had yielded a clue: the brass key, the gear, the sapphire fragment, the chess pieces all marked with the spiral, all pieces of a puzzle that led to this moment. The Lyceum Shadow, with its history of clandestine meetings and whispered conspiracies, was no random choice. Poirot sensed he was walking into a trap, but he was no stranger to danger. Captain Hastings, his loyalty restored after the warehouse rescue, insisted on accompanying him, but Poirot had sent him to coordinate with Inspector Japp, whose men were stationed discreetly around the theatre's perimeter. "Mon ami, this is a game for one," Poirot had said, his tone firm but kind. "The architect expects me alone." The theatre's entrance was boarded up, but a side door, its lock recently oiled, gave way under Poirot's deft touch with a hairpin. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of grease paint, a ghost of performances past. The auditorium was a cavern of shadows, its velvet seats frayed, its stage yawning like a dark mouth. Poirot's polished shoes echoed on the wooden floor, each step measured, his senses alert to the slightest sound. A faint glow flickered from the stage, drawing him forward. He climbed the steps, his small frame dwarfed by the towering arch. A single spotlight illuminated a table, upon which sat a gramophone, its needle poised over a spinning record. As Poirot approached, a voice crackled to life, smooth and mocking, with the same cultured tone that had taunted him over the telephone weeks ago. "Monsieur Poirot," the voice said, "welcome to my lair. You followed my crumbs admirably, but the game grows perilous. Look around you. Every step is a choice, every choice a risk." Poirot's eyes narrowed, scanning the stage. The gramophone was wired to a mechanism hidden beneath the tabula tripwire, glinting faintly in the spotlight. He stepped back, avoiding it, and noticed a trapdoor at the stage's edge, its hinges gleaming with fresh oil. The architect had designed this place as a labyrinth, each element a test of his intellect. He descended through the trapdoor, finding a narrow passage lined with rusted pipes and flickering gaslights. The air grew colder, the walls closing in as the passage twisted downward. Poirot's hand brushed the spiral key in his pocket, its weight a reminder of his purpose. The passage opened into a subterranean chamber, its walls adorned with theatrical posters, their faded images of masked figures echoing the masquerade in Paris. At the chamber's center stood a chessboard, larger than life, its squares painted on the floor, its pieces towering statues of black and white stone. A new sound emerged, low hum, like the ticking of a giant clock. Poirot's gaze darted to the ceiling, where a lattice of gears and pulleys hung, their spiral patterns unmistakable. A single Black Queen stood on the chessboard, its base inscribed with the spiral emblem. Beside it was a note. Checkmate is near, Poirot. Find the key to my design, or fall. Poirot's mind raced. The chessboard was a puzzle, its pieces arranged in a mid-game stalemate. He studied the positions, his little grey cells working furiously. The Black Queen was the key, but moving it would trigger the mechanism above a trap designed to crush him. He circled the board, noting a hidden panel beneath the White King's square. With a gentle press, it opened, revealing a brass lever etched with the spiral. Before he could act, a shadow moved in the corner, a figure in a long coat, there, face obscured by a scarf. The scarred man, the architect's enforcer, stepped forward, a dagger in hand. "You're persistent, Poirot," he growled, "but this is where it ends." Poirot's voice was calm, his eyes never leaving the dagger. "Monsieur, you are but a pawn in a greater game. Tell me, who is your master?" The man lunged, but Poirot was ready, sidestepping with a grace that belied his age. He seized a prop sword from a nearby rack, its blade dull but heavy. The scarred man laughed, advancing, but Poirot used the sword to parry, knocking the dagger free. The man stumbled, triggering a hidden wire. The gears above groaned, and a steel net dropped, narrowly missing Poirot, but trapping the scarred man. Poirot stepped back, his breath steady. "Imbecile," he muttered, turning to the lever. He pulled it, and the chessboard shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a map, its surface marked with a spiral and a single location, a castle in the Scottish Highlands, dated for the following week. The architect's true lair, perhaps, or another trap, as Japp's men stormed the chamber. Alerted by the commotion, Poirot secured the map. The scarred man, pinned under the net, cursed but refused to speak. Poirot left him to the police, his mind already on the Highlands. The theatre had been a gauntlet, each trap a test of his wits, but he had emerged with a prize. The map was a beacon, drawing him closer to the architect's heart. Back at the Savoy, Poirot spread the map on his desk, the spiral key and chess pieces beside it. The voice on the gramophone had been a taunt, but it revealed the architect's arrogance. They believed to themselves untouchable. The chamber's chessboard, with its looming queen, was a metaphor for their control, but Poirot had outmaneuvered their trap. The scarred man's capture was a small victory, but the map was the true triumph, a guide to the next stage of the game as dawn broke. Casting a pale light over London, Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve. The architect had watched him, tested him, but he had survived their lair. The Scottish castle awaited, and with it, the promise of answers. The game was far from over, but Poirot was one step closer to checkmate. Chapter 12. The Double Game. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator's cloak as Hercule Poirot stepped from a cab onto the Strand, his polished shoes gleaming despite the damp. The map from the Lyceum Shadows chessboard, marked with a spiral and a Scottish castle, lay safely in his hotel safe, but its promise of answers was tempered by a new urgency. The list of names from the silent auction had revealed another target, Sir Roland Baxter, a financier whose dealings mirrored those of Sir Alistair Gray and Judge Langley. Yet a troubling discovery had shifted Poirot's focuser. Newspaper headline, buried in the evening edition, reported the arrest of an innocent man, Dr. Julian Harrow, accused of Sir Alistair's poisoning. The evidence was damning but too perfect. A frame crafted with the architect's precision, Poirot's little grey cells hummed with suspicion. The architect was not content with murder and theft. They were manipulating justice itself, pinning their crimes on a scapegoat to divert attention. Dr. Harrow, a chemist with no prior record, had been found with a vial of tetrodotoxin in his lab, identical to the poison that killed Sir Alistair. The coincidence was no accident. Poirot suspected the architect was playing a double game, using Harrow to distract him while they advanced their next move. He arrived at Scotland Yard, where Inspector Japp was buried in paperwork, his desk a chaos of coffee-stained reports. "Poirot, you're a sight for sore eyes," Japp said, rubbing his temples. "This Harrow case is a mess. The evidence is airtight vial, fingerprints, even a witness claiming he saw Harrow near the Claridges the night of the poisoning. But something's off." "Precisement," Poirot replied, his eyes sharp. "The architect does not awe. This Dr. Harrow is a pawn, placed to obscure the true player. Tell me, what do we know of him?" Japp handed over a file. Harrow was a reclusive academic, specializing in rare toxins, with no apparent motive to kill Sir Alistair. The witness, a waiter at the Claridges, had described a man matching Harrow's appearance, but with a scarred cheek detail that pointed to the architect's enforcer. The same man Poirot had faced in Limehouse and the theatre. The vial, conveniently found in Harrow's lab, bore a spiral engraving, a silent taunt. Poirot's mind raced. The architect was tying up loose ends, framing Harrow to slow his pursuit. But the list of names suggested another target was imminent, and Poirot could not afford to be distracted. He devised a plan: clear Harrow's name while setting a trap for the architect's lieutenant, the scarred man who seemed to be their chief operative. He visited Harrow in his cell, a cramped, damp space beneath Scotland Yard. The chemist was a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses, his face etched with despair. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, clutching the bars, "I swear I'm innocent. I've never seen that vial before, and I was home the night of the banquet." Poirot's gaze softened. "Monsieur Harrow, tell me, have you ever dealt with a man named Victor Crane, or heard of one called the architect?" Harrow's eyes widened. "Crane? Yes, he commissioned a study on exotic toxins last year, said it was for a private collection. I refused when he asked for samples too dangerous. As for the architect, I've never heard the name." Poirot nodded, his suspicions confirmed. Crane was the linchpin, connecting each crime to the architect's grand design. He left Harrow with a promise: "You will be free, monsieur. Hercule Poirot does not abandon the innocent." His next stop was the Claridges, where he interviewed the waiter who had identified Harrow. The man, nervous and sweating, admitted, under Poirot's relentless questioning, that he'd been paid to lie by a man with a scarred cheek. "He gave me £50, the waiter confessed. Said it was to protect someone important." Armed with this, Poirot returned to Japp, who agreed to release Harrow on the condition of a trap to catch the scarred man. Poirot proposed a ruse, leaked to the press that Harrow had been cleared and was assisting Scotland Yard, luring the architect's operative to silence him. Japp arranged for Harrow to be moved to a safe house in Bloomsbury, under heavy guard, while Poirot and Hastings prepared an ambush. The safe house was a modest townhouse, its windows shuttered to conceal the police within. Poirot, disguised as a doctor in a white coat, waited inside with Harrow, while Hastings and Japp's men hid in adjacent rooms. The night was tense, the air thick with anticipation. At midnight, a shadow moved in the gardener figure in a long coat, the scarred man, his silhouette unmistakable. Poirot signaled Japp through a concealed wire. The scarred man entered through a back door, his movements silent but purposeful. He reached Harrow's room, raising a silenced pistol, but Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the darkness. "Monsieur, you are predictable. Drop." The weapon. The scarred man spun, but Japp's men were faster, tackling him to the floor. In the struggle, a leather pouch fell from his coat, spilling a black chess piece of bishop, its spiral gleaming. A note was tucked inside. "The game tightens, Poirot." One move left. As the scarred man was cuffed, he sneered, his voice low. "You think you've won? The architect's plan is bigger than you can imagine. You've saved this worm, but the final act is coming." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur, your master underestimates Hercule Poirot. Tell me, where is the architect?" The man laughed, refusing to speak. Japp's men took him away, leaving Poirot with the bishop and note. Harrow, trembling but relieved, thanked him profusely. "I thought I was done for," he said. "What kind of monster frames an innocent man?" "One who sees the world as a chessboard," Poirot replied, his voice grim. "But this monster has made a mistake." Back at the Savoy, Poirot added, "The bishop to his collection," the note's words echoing. One move left. The scarred man's capture was a triumph, and Harrow's freedom a victory for justice. The map to the Scottish castle loomed large, its date approaching. The architect's final act was near, and Poirot was ready to meet it. The double game had been played, and he had outwitted the trap. But the true challenge lay ahead, where shadows danced and secrets waited to be unveiled. Chapter 13. The final puzzle, the Scottish Highlands, stretched before Hercule Poirot like a tapestry of rugged beauty. Their craggy peaks shrouded in mist as his train rattled toward Glenmore Castle. The map from the Lyceum Shadows chessboard, marked with a spiral and a day-to-night, had led him here, to a fortress perched on a cliff overlooking a turbulent loch. The architect's web, woven through murders, thefts, and betrayals, converged. On this remote stronghold, the black bishop from the Shadwell safe house, its spiral emblem a constant taunt, weighed heavy in Poirot's pocket. Alongside the brass key, gear, sapphire fragment, and chess pieces. The riddle where shadows dance and secrets sleep. Find the heart that does not weep a code in his mind, its meaning crystallizing. The heart was the architect's ambition, cold and unyielding, and this castle was its final stage. Poirot travelled, alone, having sent Hastings to coordinate with Inspector Japp, whose men would follow at a distance to avoid alerting the architect. The train's rhythm matched his pulse, steady but quickening as the castle loomed into view, its stone walls blackened by centuries of wind and rain. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and salt, and a storm brewed on the horizon, its thunder a low growl. Poirot's polished shoes crunched on the gravel path as he approached the castle's iron gates, his overcoat flapping in the gusts. The game was nearing its end, and he was ready to face the mastermind. The gates were unlocked, an invitation as deliberate as the spiral clues. Inside, the castle's courtyard was silent, its cobblestones slick with dew. A single lantern hung above the entrance, casting shadows that danced across the wall's shadows that seemed to watch him. Poirot's hand brushed the brass key, its spiral warm from his pocket, as he entered the great hall. The space was vast, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting battles and betrayals. A long table stood at the center, and upon it a chessboard, its pieces arranged in a near checkmate. A black king stood alone, surrounded by white pieces, its base etched with the spiral. A voice echoed from the shadows, smooth and mocking, the same that had haunted him since the first letter. Monsieur Poirot, you've come far. Welcome to the final puzzle. Poirot turned, his eyes piercing the gloom. A figure emerged, a tall man in a tailored coat, his face obscured by a porcelain mask, its surface painted with a spiral. The architect, I presume, Poirot said, his voice steady. The figure inclined his head. A title, nothing more. You've played well, Poirot, but the board is mine. Solve the puzzle, and London lives. Fail, and a catastrophe will unfold. Poirot's gaze shifted to the chessboard, then to a device on the table, a brass contraption, its gears and wires pulsing with menace. A timer ticked ominously, its hands counting down from 10 minutes. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured. A bomb. Precisely, the architect said, his voice laced with amusement. Hidden in London, set to detonate at midnight unless you disarm it. The chessboard holds the key code to unlock the mechanism. One wrong move, and the timer accelerates. Poirot's mind raced, his little grey cells alight with focus. The chessboard was no ordinary game. Its pieces were weighted, their positions a cipher. He studied the board, noting the black king's precarious position, surrounded by a white queen, bishop, and knight. Each piece bore a tiny number etched into its base, and the board's squares were marked with subtle symbols, spirals. Of course, the architect watched, his mask unreadable. You see the pattern, don't you? My design is flawless, but I give you this chance. Prove your genius, Poirot. Poirot ignored the taunt, his fingers hovering over the pieces. The numbers 3, 7, 9, 12 suggested a sequence, but the symbols hinted at a deeper code. He recalled the cipher from the clockmaker's shop, the numbers aligning with letters. Moving the white queen to a spiral-marked square, he heard a click from the device, the timer pausing briefly. Interesting, he murmured, his confidence growing. The architect's voice sharpened. Careful, Poirot. One misstep, and London burns. Poirot moved the bishop next, aligning it with another spiral. Another click, and the timer slowed further. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his hands were steady. The knight was the final piece, its number 12, matching the map's date. He placed it on a square marked with a double spiral, and the device emitted a low hum, its timer freezing at 30 seconds. The architect clapped slowly, the sound echoing in the hall. Impressive. You've disarmed the bomb, but the game is not over. Poirot's eyes blazed. Nan, monsieur, your game ends. Here, your design is flawed, for you have underestimated Hercule Poirot. Before the architect could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Jap's men, storming the castle. The architect turned, his mask slipping slightly, revealing a glimpse of pale skin and dark eyes. He bolted toward a side passage, but Poirot was faster, seizing a tapestry pole and tripping him. The mask clattered to the floor, but the architect twisted free, vanishing into the shadows with a parting taunt. This is not checkmate, Poirot. I'll return. Jap burst in, his men securing the hall. Poirot, you're a miracle worker. The bomb's disarmed, and we've got the castle surrounded. Poirot nodded, his gaze on the passage where the architect had fled. The device was safe, its wires cut by Jap's explosives expert, and London was spared. But the victory was bittersweet. The architect had escaped, leaving only the chessboard and a new clue, a brass medallion. Dropped in the scuffle, its spiral engraved with a single word, reckoning back at his hotel. Poirot added the medallion to his collection, its weight a reminder of the knight's triumph and failure. The chessboard puzzle had been solved, saving countless lives, but the architect's escape stung. The riddle's heart that did not weep was the architect's own, a cold ambition that drove their schemes. The word reckoning promised a final confrontation, and Poirot was determined to meet it. For now, he had won a crucial battle, but the war was not over. The highlands faded behind him as he prepared for the endgame, his resolve unbreakable. Chapter 14. The Reckoning. The seaside village of St. Ives shimmered under a late autumn sun, its cobblestone streets winding between whitewashed cottages and the restless Atlantic. Hercule Poirot stood on a cliff overlooking the harbour, the wind tugging at his overcoat as he clutched the brass medallion from Glenmore Castle, its spiral engraving warm from his pocket. The word reckoning etched into its surface was a promise, a final challenge from the architect, whose escape in the Highlands had left Poirot burning with resolve. The spiral, Kluski gear, chess pieces, sapphire fragment, and now the medallion led him here to a place where the game would end. The riddle where shadows dance and secrets sleep. Find the heart that does not weep had guided him through murders, thefts, and betrayals, and now pointed to the architect's cold, unyielding heart. Poirot had pieced together the pattern. Each crime of Alan Hart's abduction, the clockmaker's murder, the poisoned chalice, the stolen codex page, the theatre's trapped targeted figures of influence, disrupting power structures with surgical precision. The architect's grand design was to reshape the world, bending it to their will through chaos. But Poirot had thwarted their bomb, saved lives, and captured their lieutenant. Now, in St. Ives, he would end the game. His inquiries had uncovered a lead. A reclusive scholar, Dr. Felix Marwood, lived in a cliffside manor overlooking the village. Marwood, a former colleague from Poirot's days in the Belgian police, had vanished years ago after a scandal involving forged evidence. His brilliance was matched only by his ambition, a trait that now cast him as a prime suspect. The list of names from the silent auction included Marwood's initials, and whispers in London's underworld tied him to Victor Crane. Poirot suspected Marwood was the architect, hiding in plain sight, orchestrating his schemes from this remote outpost. He approached the manor at dusk, its windows glowing like eyes in the fading light. Captain Hastings, restored to his side after the betrayal, waited with Japp's men in the village, ready to move on Poirot's signal. The manor's door was ajar, a silent invitation. Poirot entered, his polished shoes silent on the parquet floor. The interior was a blend of elegance and decayable floors strewn with faded rugs, walls lined with books and maps marked with spirals. A voice greeted him from the shadows, smooth and familiar. "Monsieur Poirot, you've followed my trail to the end. I knew you would." Poirot turned, his eyes locking onto a figure by the fireplace. Dr. Felix Marwood, older but unmistakable, stood in a tailored suit, his dark eyes gleaming with a mix of admiration and menace. His face bore no mask, only the confidence of a man who believed himself invincible. "Monsieur Marwood," Poirot said, his voice steady, "or shall I call you the architect?" Marwood smiled, gesturing to a chessboard on a nearby table, its pieces arranged in a final stalemate. "A fitting title, don't you think? You've played my game well, Poirot, but this is checkmate." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Nan, monsieur, your game is flawed. You have left a trail spirals, chess pieces, riddles, each a thread I have woven into your downfall." Marwood laughed, stepping closer. "You think you've won. My design, is complete. The codex page, the reliquary, the disruptions, they've sown chaos among the powerful. Nations will bend to my will. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, you are here, alone, in a crumbling manor. Your lieutenant is in custody. Your bomb disarmed. Your heart does not weep, but it is exposed. Marwood's smile faded. He reached for a concealed panel, revealing a control box wired to explosives embedded in the manor's walls. One move, Poirot, and this place collapses. You, me, and your precious justice gone. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm, but commanding. You underestimate me, mon ami. I anticipated your trap. He produced the brass key, its spiral matching the control box's lock. This key, left in the gutter of Whitehaven Mansions, was your first mistake. It fits your design, does it not? Marwood's eyes widened as Poirot inserted the key, turning it with a click. The control box hummed, its lights dimming as the explosives deactivated. Impossible, Marwood hissed, lunging for a hidden blade. But Poirot was ready, sidestepping, and tripping him with a swift move of his cane. The door burst open, Japp's men flooding in, led by Hastings. Marwood struggled, but the constables were swift, cuffing him as he spat curses. You've won nothing, Poirot. My ideas will live. On Poirot's gaze was steady. Non, monsieur. Ideas built on blood and deceit do not endure. Justice prevails. As Marwood was led away, Poirot examined the chessboard. Its black king toppled. A final note lay beneath it, in Marwood's elegant script. The game ends, but the spiral turns. Poirot smiled faintly. The architect's words were empty now, their power broken. The manor was secured, its secrets laid bare. Japp's men found documents linking Marwood to Victor Crane, who was arrested in London, and a cache of stolen artifacts, including the codex page and the Star of St. Denis. The architect's network unraveled, its pawns exposed. Poirot returned to his London flat, the sea air still clinging to his coat. He arranged his Kluski gear, chess pieces, sapphire fragment, medallion on his desk, a testament to his triumph. The riddle's heart had been Marwood's ambition, and Poirot had found it, ending the game with a checkmate of his own dot. As he sat by his fire, a tisane in hand, Poirot reflected on the cost. Lives had been lost, trust tested, but justice had prevailed. He closed his notebook, its pages filled with the case's details, and gazed out at the city. The spiral had stopped turning, and the architect was no more. Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, retired to his garden, content that the world was a little more orderly, its shadows a little less dark.